Welcome, everybody. Hi there. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Jennifer Rigg. I serve as the Executive Director at the Global Campaign for Education US. We're a coalition of over 80 organizations working together to ensure quality, inclusive education for all. And we're really delighted today in particular to be focusing on youth engagement, how to make sure that together we're reaching vulnerable children and youth around the globe, and ending education in emergencies crises, making sure that the right to education is achieved no matter what humanitarian situation that a young person lives in around the world. We have amazing speakers. We're so delighted that you could join us today. And in particular, please do share your information, and this is designed to be an interactive discussion. We want to hear from each of you. Please share in the chat box your name, your organizational affiliation, if that's applicable, and where you're zooming in from today, what your location is. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're just really thrilled to be able to bring to you a fantastic discussion as we're preparing the United Nations Transforming Education Summit, or TESS, in just a few short weeks in September in New York. We're really thrilled as well to be hearing from the Children's Policy and Funding Initiative, or CPFI, and the CPFI Youth Alliance Working Group. I want to thank all of you for bringing this discussion together today and for your amazing coalition building and advocacy work together. And we know that in particular, there's some fantastic new resources to really help power our advocacy together. So IMEE, World Vision, many organizations are joining this discussion today. And like I said, please continue to share your ideas and let us know how you'd like to be active and strengthen your advocacy and our collective impact together. So with that, I'm really delighted to introduce our first speakers, Kelly Case, Emily Davis, and Alex Arriaga. The three of them together work not only with the Children's Policy and Funding Initiative at the Tide Center, but also with Strategy for Humanity. They bring amazing expertise and leadership. It's just been such a delight to work with them the last few years, and I think you'll appreciate from their presentation today the amazing opportunities to together advance children's focused issues and to really reach children and youth across ages, across the spectrum, across the globe, across sectors. And my colleague Krista Giesica has kindly shared their full bios. You'll see that they and all the speakers today have really rich, amazing backgrounds. And please join me in welcoming them to kick off our discussion today. Over to you, Kelly.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located. I apologize for my voice. My whole family got struck by a virus, not COVID, but something else, and we're still kind of recovering. So apologies for my cracky voice, but it's really lovely to be here. We're going to go through some slides quickly and leave a few minutes for Q&A. So my name is Kelly Case. I'm the project director for the Children's Policy and Funding Initiative. Stephanie, if you want to actually move to the next slide, that would be great. So the Children's Policy and Funding Initiative is a pooled fund investment by 3 different foundations: GHR Foundation, Oak Foundation, and Wellspring. Can go to the next slide, please. The initiative was started about 3 years ago. We're in the 3rd year of this pooled fund. And within the initiative, there are several grantee organizations that I've listed here. The grantees have broad reach. They bring new allies. They're highly respected and impactful and able to achieve policy wins. As you can see, GCE-US is one of our grantees, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to be working with them. On to the next slide, please. And the goal of the initiative, it was created with the idea that children are really sort of an afterthought in policymaking in the US. And so the initiative was brought together to really influence the US government to make young people globally a top priority in US policy programming and foreign assistance, to elevate the critical issues affecting children and adolescents, and also really importantly to facilitate greater collaboration and coordination across the advocacy community, We really believe that the sum is greater than the siloed parts. And so, within this community, recognizing that a lot of people are very sector specific, we felt that it was important to bring the community together to look at a more whole child or life course approach. You can go on to the next slide. And so the idea is that this initiative is really not, we don't think it's enough to exclusively focus just on one topic. It's necessary to take a multi-sectoral lens or approach to address the needs of children and youth, tailoring to conditions, meeting the various gaps and needs. And so we recognize really that the sum is greater than its individual parts, and that collaboration across sectors improves knowledge, it enhances advocacy, and it builds momentum for greater holistic support to children and youth globally. So that's really the goal of the initiative. And we can go on to the next slide. So why now? There's some statistics here I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but really, we feel like this is a moment in time with COVID, conflicts around the world, climate change. These crises are really upending the lives of children and youth, and they're, making it much harder for them to thrive and reach their fullest potential. COVID has really sort of caused us to backslide on a lot of the development that's happened over the last few decades. And so this is particularly important in under-resourced parts of the world. And so, the COVID, conflict, and climate are three priority areas, but we would say that a fourth C is children, and that their critical needs and voices can't be forgotten among these global priorities, and that the US really should be a leader in prioritizing investing in education and care and health and safety in children. On to the next slide. And then just, it's clear, like children who are exposed to severe trauma, violence, sexual abuse, insecurity, really have experienced long-term disruption to their physical, psychological, and social well-being. So we feel that now more than ever, a priority initiative and investment in children and youth globally is critical for our future. So I pass it on to my colleague, Alex.
Thank you so much. So again, the primary purpose here was to look at the US government's actions and behaviors. The US government has been a major funder around the world for programs affecting children and youth. And so when the US government a number of years ago and ongoing has been evaluating its foreign assistance programs and threatening to reduce foreign assistance, the donors, the foundations that have set up this initiative felt it was very important to create something that really pressed on the US government to increase those funds and to set aside funds, and as Kelly said, to prioritize children and youth. So, there could have been many, many goals, but this initiative very specifically was to ensure that the US government would increase its funding, would safeguard its funding, increase it, and make it more impactful to affect children and youth overseas. And that's why, frankly, we focused on these organizations that are very effective in addressing the needs of children and youth, but also know how to influence the US government and to partner to make sure they do the right thing. And that they are organizations that have networks all over the world so that whatever is being presented actually represents the needs because of the networks they have and the consultations that take place. So with that, as Kelly said, what were some of the challenges that we addressed or that we really considered? One is, as Kelly said, that children tend to be an afterthought. Everybody thinks that they are for children, but in fact, unless they are intentionally looking at what the impact of a policy will be on children, then children will be an afterthought, and we haven't really thought through what the impact will be and how to mitigate it. The US governments tend to be very fragmented, and that really undermines their capacity to take this holistic approach. You might have an education department, and you might have, a gender equality department, and you might have a health department, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. Available funding has been very, very difficult to track because the budgets and the accounts have not been clear on which ones are impacting children and youth. And sometimes they're double counted. And also, as I said earlier, the interagency and even within agencies, the intra-agency collaboration is minimal. Transparency is not always there. And that means that there are important gaps. And there are also places where agency may be competing against each other in a country and they're not even aware of it. So really the idea of better collaboration is important. The next slide, please. So what we decided was to really focus on US leadership, to look at how the US government as a provider of foreign assistance could inspire and provoke other governments to respond more robustly. And so what we're calling for is US action now, for all the reasons that Kelly said: COVID, climate, conflict. As you know better than most, how this has affected children and youth is immense. And right now is the time to address those gaps and needs in order to secure a better future for all of us. So decisive action now can have far-reaching global impact. And it needs to be a government-wide initiative. It needs to be systemic, it needs to be intentional, and it needs to look holistically at all of the situations that impact a child or a young person. So next slide. Where we came out was we called together many experts. We had many consultations. And we looked at prior US government priorities to see what they had in common in order to be truly effective. There's no project that is perfect, but these are the factors and characteristics that help. One is you need to have White House leadership. You need the White House to say, this is a priority for me. We need the White House to say children and youth all over the world are a priority in the United States and everywhere else. Two, you need to have coordination across the US government. That means that you have to have clearly identified senior leadership in each agency with access to the top official, the cabinet level, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Education, etc. There needs to be an interagency process set up, and there needs to be a whole of government strategy. And we also identified the very effective role of impact statements. Before you initiate any new policy, have a child youth impact statement. What will be the impact of this policy on children, on youth? So that is a piece that we believe is really important to make this children and youth a true priority. We need funding. And for that, an important piece is a cross-agency priority. That is a process where the White House tells its Office of Management and Budget to instruct all agencies to make an issue a priority, so that when every US government agency submits its budget proposal, it indicates how they are addressing that priority. This would then require every agency to indicate how they are addressing children and youth. And then finally, just better tracking. And that has been a win. Because of the work of the Global Campaign for Education and others, the Congress is now requiring better tracking for the first time, better monitoring and tracking. And so that is a direct result of the work that you are doing through this initiative. And then the fourth pillar is meaningful youth consultation and input. None of this work will be effective. None of this work will be relevant unless we know what is needed. And for that, we need youth to be instructing and informing us on the right priorities. Over to you, Emily.
Great. The initiative values and welcomes the participation of young people. It is critical that for young people to have their voices heard and to provide input into decisions that impact their lives, and for civil society to set an example for engagement. The Youth Alliance Working Group is comprised of fellows, interns, and young people, and provides partners with a practical way to ensure that youth perspectives are a part of the process. We want to set an example for the US government to showcase that working together with youth is possible and can be successful. If you're interested in learning more, or if you're a youth who want to be involved in this, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can email me, of course, and my other contact information will be at the end of the slideshow. Next slide, please. So currently we have a couple working streams that we're working on right now. We are reviewing and providing feedback on initiative proposals to ensure that youth perspectives are included. We are working towards finalizing and socializing the idea of a congressional caucus on children and youth globally. We are also working with other organizations to elevate youth voices. We're in the process of submitting some blog posts for World Vision to put on their website. Some members of the Youth Alliance Working Group were highlighted by the Youth Peace and Security Coalition for International Youth Day. And we contributed to a Generation at Stake website to ensure youth voices. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have two key websites, the initiative, that work hand in hand. The A Generation at Stake is a website that has our overall messaging and how to take action. And the Children's Policy and Funding Initiative website has more detailed information about the initiative, what we're advocating for, our newsletter, and other resources. Next slide, please. So this is our contact information. Also, there's another QR code if you're interested in subscribing to our newsletter that goes out weekly on Mondays. And thank you.
That was really terrific. Thank you so very much, Alex, Kelly, and Emily, for your work, your leadership, and to everybody that's part of this initiative. We had a few questions in the chat box already. If there are other questions or comments, please do chime in either in the chat box or by using the Zoom tools to signal to raise your hand if you'd like to come off mute. Kelly or Alex, do you want to address? We have a couple of questions that came in from Casey and Suzanne regarding, asking if you could share a little bit more about the engagement with children and youth with disabilities, or to what extent they've been considered. And thank you to Kelly for immediately responding in the chat box. Completely agree. Disability Rights International is one of the grantees with this initiative. We're working with them on a number of opportunities and facilitating greater collaboration between the disability community and the broader children's advocacy community. They are supporting each other. And Alex is such an amazing leader in this space as well. So just wanted to open the floor, Alex, Kelly, saving your voice, and Emily, if you'd like to respond to these great questions.
I don't know if Alex or Emily wanted to add any more, but yes, so we, children and youth with disabilities is very important to us. And so we do have DRI as one of our grantees, and they are just extraordinary organization. It's good to see Dragon on the call. We've been working with them on a number of opportunities. I won't go into depth on them, but I feel really confident that they are making some really impressive progress. And what we have also really tried to do through bringing DRI on and some of the other grantees is to try and bring those communities together that are sometimes often siloed and maybe not working together as much as they would like. And so our other grantees that might not focus specifically on disability are starting to now advocate for some of the work that DRI is doing to bring more of a disability lens into some of this advocacy work. So yes, it's very important to us, and recognize that while that is just one specific disability organization as a grantee, it is a core component of the work that we do, and our grantees across the board recognize that and are working with Eric and others at DRI to push some of their work forward. But happy to take other questions, or Alex wanted to.
I'll just add one point to this, which is to underscore that that the situation for young people with disabilities is near and dear to my heart and to many of us. And so we are intentional about asking about how all of these initiatives will affect children with disabilities and whether or not they are included. We believe strongly that any initiative needs to look at who will have the greatest difficulty first. And then if you can create something that addresses those needs, then you will create something that addresses everyone's needs. And so we have heard from other grantees that having Disability Rights International, which is collaborating closely with USID, with the U.S. International Council on Disabilities, which, as you may know, is a network of organizations as well. So their collaboration has sort of multiplied the voices of organizations with disabilities. And in fact, when we recently prepared a letter to the White House, to President Biden, requesting that the priorities we have set out be White House priorities, it was impressive to us that I would say of all of the sectors, the organizations around the world at the regional, local, and global level that focus on young people with disabilities were probably the largest sector that signed on to the letter, which we were really, really pleased to see. So thank you so much for highlighting that issue for us.
Thank you all. That's really great to hear. And many of you are active members of the Inclusive Education and Early Childhood Community of Practice. So we're grateful to you for helping to spread the word on that policy influencing opportunity and others. Our colleague Stephanie Pena will speak at the end of the meeting today to invite everybody to the next Community of Practice meeting, but we can share in the chat box now how to join that effort as well. Huge thanks, Emily, for making it easy with the QR codes to scan, and Kelly for sharing the links in the chat box. Let's keep the conversation going. We understand, Kelly, if you need to hop off to another meeting and engagement, but we're so grateful to Alex, to Kelly, to Emily for joining us today, and encourage all of you to get involved if you're not already by signing up for this initiative's wonderful weekly newsletter. And as Emily said, for getting involved with a generation at stake and helping to spread that word to other young people and potential youth advocates to join arms with this great work together. And with that, I'm going to pass to our fantastic student and youth leader, Annie Lynn, who has wonderfully organized the next section of our discussion today. But thank you very much to Alex, to Kelly, to Emily for kicking off this great discussion.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you to the entire CPFI team, and happy belated International Youth Day. Just to echo what Jennifer was saying, definitely, if you are interested in youth, sign up for the CPFI Youth Alliance Working Group. So next up, we're super excited to have Doris Mwikali as one of our inspiring youth speakers. So Doris is the elected youth representative to the high-level steering committee, Sherpa group. She's also a member of the UNESCO SDG4 youth network. And at the network, she serves as Africa's representative to the SDG4 Youth Network Executive Committee, and has been one of the key leaders who's been leading the Transforming Education Summit Youth Declaration process. Her work at the UNESCO SDG4 Youth Network draws from her solid experience as the partnership and advocacy lead at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development's Youth Action Hub Kenya, and also as the youth leader at the Center for International Private Enterprise, where she works to advance the financial inclusion of over 500,000 refugees in Kenya. And on the climate side, she's also the National Youth Climate Action Program lead at Kenya Red Cross. And in this role, Doris focuses on building an ecosystem for the organization's volunteers to thrive and adapt in the face of the climate crisis. Doris, we're so grateful to have you, and I'm going to hand it over to you to speak more about your personal experience and background as a youth advocate for quality education, and also recognizing that you and your SDG4 Youth Network colleagues have been working really hard on pushing the Youth Declaration process forward. It would be great to hear more about the process, as well as key outcomes from the online consultations and your own grassroots consultations, along with any other updates that you have in the lead up to the Transforming Education Summit, along with just your hopes for the summit and the future of transforming education. So over to you, Doris.
Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you for the good introduction. I was speaking about my bio. My name is Doris Mwikali, and I'm calling in from Nairobi. And as Annie has introduced, I'm the youth and student representative to the UNESCO SDG4 High-Level Steering Committee. And the High-Level Steering Committee is the body that will be receiving the commitments from the Transforming Education Summit and ensuring that there's effective follow-up to ensure that we renew our commitments towards ensuring that education is truly transformed, it is inclusive, and every young person, child, and student is able to access education around the world. So I'm not really gonna spend a lot of time speaking about my experience working within the refugee space. I know we have a fantastic speaker who's gonna focus more on that, which is Neil Deng. He's a friend of mine. So a little bit of background. The first time I really interacted with education in emergencies was in 2020 when the COVID pandemic started in Kenya. And I was working with the Untitled Youth Action Hub. And I'm very passionate about ensuring that we create ecosystems for everybody to be able to achieve sustainable economic growth. And I was just working on UNCTAD, and I was on Twitter, and I saw this amazing young man called Neil Deng that was doing amazing work on refugees. And I kid you not, we connected over Twitter, and over the next 2 years, I started working on the financial inclusion of refugees with an organization called Center for International Private Enterprise that is funded by the US Congress and is part of the US Chamber of Commerce. So my work at SIPE focuses on working with stakeholders to ensure that refugees are financially included by addressing policy barriers. As you know, there's a lot of work in Kakuma refugee camp, and Neil is going to speak about his lived experience as a refugee there, and a lot of young people that want to rebuild their lives by starting businesses, and the organization working to equip young people with lifelong learning on how you can create a business, how you can rebuild your life as a young person who's a refugee. However, there are certain policy barriers within the Kenyan policy system that does not allow refugees to do this. So my work in working with emergencies was that, and it really opened my eyes also to the context of education and refugees. It was amazing to see, especially the journey of Neil, and he's going to speak about it, him getting accepted to Berkeley and how he ended up in Canada. I'm sure he's going to talk about that. And it just showed how education genuinely is the only way sometimes it creates foundation for us to be all equal. It is that one thing that will ensure that it's a foundational element to ensure that we achieve Agenda 2030, and every young person or child or student is able to achieve their dreams. Education does that, regardless of who you are, regardless of if you're a refugee, a person with disabilities, a person from a developing country. Education opens up your world. It enables you to really pursue your dreams, to become the person that you want to be. So that is my background in terms of working with refugees. Now I know I'll focus on what is in everybody's mind, which is the Transforming Education Summit. I'm among the young people that are working with UNESCO within the SDG4 Youth Network, which is the official youth body that works within the global cooperation mechanism for education, that is working with the Office of the UN Youth Envoy to really push the Youth Declaration to ensure that the perspectives, the priorities of the young people are shared in member states in terms of transformed education. And how that process has shaped up is that we had grassroots consultations that were being conducted by young people, led by young people all over the world. I conducted grassroots consultations in Kenya. It was fantastic. I'll share the video later. I was dancing. I met children from two informal settlements in Nairobi. That is Kibera and Mathare, and also we met over 80 students at Strathmore University. And our key message was, we are the young people that are privileged to be able to interact with this system. What are your priorities, so that we could keep them as raw data to ensure that that is the foundation of the Youth Declaration. And one of the key messages was just what was being discussed in this meeting, children with disabilities, how do we include them? And for me, sometimes the thing about you not having like a certain lived experience is that you don't think about it. During COVID, I never thought, what is children with disabilities doing in terms of digital learning? And during our grassroots consultations, the key concern was that there's specific software when you're a young person with disability in university for you to be able to access online learning. Young people do not have that kind of money to access that software, so they were not able to continue with learning during COVID. Young people or children in informal settlements are not even able to get a simple right as having a safe and inclusive playground to play during recess. So they just sit in class and there's nothing going on. So you can see how their foundational learning is affected. We had young people in university really having a big concern on how there isn't a lot of mental health support within schools. There's a lot happening within the world. There's a lot of anxiety in terms of the climate crisis, democracy. So a lot of young people are carrying a lot on their shoulders, but our school system is not able to meet the needs of the learner to ensure that their mental health is well catered for. And another concern is, unemployment. The numbers of unemployment are skyrocketing all over the world. We have education systems that teach us to do everything right. You go to high school, you get the good grades, you go to campus, and then you're left with a degree and you have nowhere to go. And just like, I thought I did the right things. Why am I not getting the money and the job to give me everything I wanted to have? So we have education systems that are not addressing the needs of the learner or preparing the learner in terms of the future of work. So these are some of the concerns that came out during our grassroots consultations in Kenya. And it's still, just a minute, my nephew's here again. Oh, he's gone. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Yes, so I was just saying, we have an education system that does not prepare the learner in terms of them meeting the future of work. And not just the future of work, but us being a group of young people that have the right kind of innovation, ingenuity, also to meet the most pressing challenges of our time. We have an education system that does not give us the tools to address the climate crisis, that does not give us the tools to be able to address the digital divide. So we do genuinely need to transform education. So that was some of the feedback we got during our grassroots consultations in Kenya. And we wrote an article for the TESS Secretariat. It was published in the TESS Hub. I'm happy to share it in the link once I'm done for you guys to get to read it. And of course, our videos. We had so much fun. We danced. Our consultations were not gloomy. We had like a bit of energy, a lot of energy. So I'm happy to share that. And it's just not me who was conducting this grassroots consultation. There's so many young people from all over the world. I saw grassroots consultations in Argentina, grassroots consultations in Nigeria. So a lot of young people are passionate about really leading this process in terms of transforming education. So now I'm going to talk about the Youth Declaration and my hopes for the Transforming Education Summit. As part of within the high-level steering committee, we're two young women who are representing young people and students. That is me and Kenisha Aurora from Canada. And for us, we do understand that transforming education really doesn't happen in New York. Transforming education does not happen in the offices in the UN. Transforming education happens in our local communities. And what has been happening is that people are forgetting that the person who leads that process is not government, it is not stakeholders, it is not civil societies. It is young people that are so passionate that are going continuously back in their communities. For example, during our grassroots consultation, we were leveraging on a colleague of mine, he's called Francis Othiambo. He has a safe space for young children called Cheza Cheza in Kibera, where young people come and children come and they spend their Saturdays there trying to, really like encouraging them to understand how education is important and reimagining that through dance. You know, can you imagine a young person doing this out of pocket? Nobody's supporting them. It's just a grassroots consultation, just a young person with a specific concern so that this is needed. So transforming education really goes back to young people leading that process. And not even just young people leading the process in terms of grassroots, but also we cannot say we are transforming education, creating or reimagining conventional learning systems without the learner. You know, it is chaotic that a bunch of, you know, older people go into a room, decide this is our new curriculum, this is our education system, and we are just going to feed into that. That system, for it to be transformed, you need to have the input of the children, of the students, and of the young people, so to ensure that whatever you're trying to transform will meet their needs. So the Youth Declaration is the instrument that is going to be ensuring that it is the instrument that is going to be shared to all stakeholders to ensure that, one, we are sharing what are the priorities of young people in terms of transforming education. And secondly, we are also have an instrument to hold our stakeholders accountable in the follow-up of the summit, because that's where the real work is, in the follow-up of the summit. So the Youth Declaration is ensuring there is meaningful engagement of young people by sharing these priorities. So we had 3 global consultations, one in Paris during the pre-summit. I don't know if some of you joined. I hope some of you joined the in-person consultation in Paris. We had a consultation, I don't remember the month, and like the last one was in August, and we had a lot of young people sharing their input. So the Office of the UN Youth Envoy and UNESCO will be gathering that input, putting that in that document, and then it's going to be shared during the Transforming Education Summit. But for me, I am hopeful that this document will not just be another document lying around in some office in the UN and it's going to just be dusty. I hope that member states are really going to take this into consideration, but that won't happen if young people do not come together, mobilize, and really push governments to do this. As 15% of the population, young people have so much power to just come together and really push for their priorities. And that's why for me, I know sometimes people say, oh, we're tired of young people saying we do social media campaigns, but I still feel like they're very important, because sometimes if you're constantly pushing that message that this is your priority, it means that you ensure that a political leader is aware that if you're not going to make this a priority, I'm going to vote you out. It goes back to the social contract. So I really would encourage any young person to be here. Don't think that your voice is just, it's not enough. You constantly pushing for your government to make sure that SG4 is a priority is enough. You just need to get 10 more friends, and your 10 friends get other 10 more friends. And it's an entire, I don't know what I say, like an army of young people that is trying to really transform education. So for me, I feel like that is the role of young people as we head for the Transforming Education Summit. And we were also lucky for my colleagues and I that were working in Kenya to work on the national consultation with our ministry. I know a lot of young people have not been as lucky to be involved in the national consultations of your ministry, but I still feel like you use your power. I mean, Twitter them, write letters, just write articles, demand that they involve you in the process, demand that they bring it to New York as part of their national delegations. I know change doesn't happen immediate. It's not now when you're asking for it. No, you need to be consistent. You need to push for it. And I know Neil is going to be talking about that. I mean, from, a refugee coming out, I've only seen Neil in global platforms. Probably he'll tell us how you need to be consistent in terms of your advocacy journey to ensure that you see real change. So yeah, I want to encourage all young people that are here to continue pushing for Transforming Education Summit. I genuinely do believe that Youth Declaration will be a document that will be helpful as the young people within, working with UNESCO, and more importantly, as the young people part of the high-level steering committee in the follow-up of the summit. For me, I am genuinely passionate to ensure that those youth priorities are at the forefront of transforming education. So thank you so much for having me here. I hope I addressed your concerns in terms of the Transforming Education Summit, my hope for it. But I think it can't be hopeful if we are not hopeful. The hope comes from us really showing up and really pushing stakeholders, challenging the status quo. We must challenge the status quo. If you don't challenge it, nobody's gonna do anything. So for me, I am challenging the status quo, and I hope you will also do the same. So yeah, write those articles, send that tweet, do that live. It looks like something small, but honestly, that consistent effort, everybody doing that is what is going to transform education. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Doris, for all of your words of wisdom. And I see in the chat, Jennifer has linked the Transforming Education Summit website for more information. Please feel free to, especially youth on this call, feel free to share your questions in the chat. I have a question for you, Doris. The online youth consultations have been an amazing platform for youth to share their inputs. As we lead up to tests, are there any opportunities? Is there somewhere that youth can email to add their input to be ensured that their input is included in the final declaration?
Oh, Annie, I'm going to try and answer that question. I don't have like a very direct answer. I mean, I would encourage anybody who has specific inputs or written to share them with the test secretariat and address that as input for the youth declaration. But we had already, the time frame for that input to be shared has already closed because it was, I think, it's August. The month before August is July, yes. We had an entire period before July where you could write your inputs through the grassroots consultations and share a document with UNESCO and the Office of the UN Envoy to ensure that our inputs are taken into consideration in terms of the youth declaration. But I feel like the process might be a bit fluid. So my advice would be to reach out to the test secretariat for them to be able to give you more advice in regards to what that is. But I also feel like we shouldn't also have an overemphasis in ensuring that our inputs are part of just the youth declaration. There are so many ways to engage with the Transforming Education Summit. There are consultations for the action tracks and there are national consultations. And for me, I would actually encourage people to share their inputs on a context base. It's more powerful when you say your context base. So if you're in the US, I don't know, I know that I don't know why I'm even going there. I know the US is no longer part of UNESCO, but anyway, if you're, let's pick Kenya. If you're from Kenya and you have specific priorities that you feel like they need to be transformed for young people, I think it's more powerful when you share it with the Ministry of Education than when you share it from a global arena. Change really happens in the local community. So I feel like we should always go back to the engagement points within our context because that's where change happens than the global arena. But please email the test secretariat and yeah, I hope they take into consideration your inputs. But I'm sure you have great inputs. You could even share with us today. We'll be happy to hear them out. So I hope I've answered your question, Annie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doris. And to just add on to that, for all the youth and everyone on this call, please do follow on social media. I know Doris often posts about the grassroots consultations. Following those key outcomes are really important. And next up, we are also so excited to have Neil Deng as our second youth speaker. So Neil is a 23-year-old South Sudanese refugee, writer, youth advocate, and community activist. He spent 11 years in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya and now attends Huron University in Canada. As a youth leader and community activist in Kakuma, Neil initiated a number of projects in the camp to help young people build brighter futures, such as the Refugee Youth Peace Ambassadors and She Leads Kakuma. He is passionate about the role of education, mentorship, and social entrepreneurship as powerful tools for young refugees to build better futures in communities, and his work revolves around education, gender equality, and peace building. Today, while pursuing a bachelor's degree in global affairs and digital communication, Neil is very active in the advocacy space for refugees, education, and meaningful youth engagement. And he's involved in several youth movements and sits on a number of advisory boards, including Canada's Refugee Education Council. Neil, we're so glad to have you here with us today, and I'm going to hand it over to you to speak more about your experiences as a refugee advocate, a youth advocate, a community activist, fighting for quality inclusive education in emergency contexts for refugee and children and youth. And we're so glad to see on social media that you and your colleagues have been leading grassroots consultations with children and youth in Kakuma refugee camps. So it would be great to hear some of those key outcomes along with your hopes for meaningful, inclusive, and equitable youth engagement, especially as we look towards the summit and beyond in transforming education. So over to you, Neil.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for having me here today. I'm so glad I could join and share my thoughts and my journey, my perspective on transforming education. And thank you so much, Doris, for those very kind words. Myself and Doris, we've known each other over the last 2 years, and she's been a great ally and colleague, and we collaborated together on a number of projects. And I remember having her in Kakuma, which was really great. So thank you, Doris, for those kind words and for your work. Truly inspiring. My name is Nialdeng. I'm a South Sudanese refugee writer, youth advocate, community activist. I spent 11 years in Kakuma refugee camp before moving to Canada last year. And my family has been affected by war for generations. I was born and raised in Ethiopia, where my father fled after fleeing the First Sudan Civil War more than 5 decades ago. My dad moved from South Sudan to Ethiopia in 1971, and I was born in Ethiopia in 1999. And growing up, my dad used to have a radio, so he would listen to BBC, and I would go to school in the morning, come back in the evening. My dad worked very hard to make sure I could go to school because he himself had his education interrupted in South Sudan by the civil war going on there. So he wanted me to be able to go to school in Ethiopia. And, just going to school, listening to the radio, I was so fascinated by the world outside my own world. So many things happening across the world, but I also hungered by the injustice that my father went through, having to flee war so many times, having to go through so many difficulties to find a place to go to call home. But I was also inspired by the radio. I remember there was this one BBC news anchor that would, talk every morning. And one day I asked my dad, what would it take for me to talk on his radio so that he can also listen to me? So he told me I need to go to school, master very good English, and then go to London and work for BBC. So the next morning I went to school in my village in Ethiopia, and I asked my teacher, I came here today to learn good English. What would it take for me to do that? And she told me, you need to read a lot of books. You need to watch American television shows. So we didn't have a TV, but I have access to a few books in the school library. So every single day after my classes, I'd go to the library and just spend the whole day there reading. I come back in the evening and then I join my dad. We listen to the radio, and I will listen very closely, try to see if there are any words that I read today that I could that the news anchor would say, and I note them down. And tomorrow just brag about those words in the school. And that was like a great way for me to just learn about the world outside me, but also start dreaming as a kid. I was about 9 years old, and then 2 years later, my village in Ethiopia was attacked by a harm militia. My dad sent me with a group of refugees to Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. It took us 2 weeks to get to the camp. I arrived at the camp at the age of 11 by myself. My father instead moved back to South Sudan with my mother and 2 siblings. So it was a very traumatizing journey arriving in the camp by myself at age 11. I did not know where to start. I remember after we arrived, we went into the UN compound in the camp where we were registered as refugees, and we're taken into a reception. My life took a turn again when I started school 2 months later in the refugee camp. I remember going to classroom early in the morning, and I was so happy, I was so excited. I sit in a classroom with over 120 kids from more than 10 different countries. And I remember after my class, I went to my teacher and said, when I was a kid growing up in Ethiopia, I wanted to be a journalist. Can I learn good English? And she told me, yeah, I could. So my teacher advised me to go to the library from time to time, and I would go there and just study and read. And then, sometime I would, just walk around the community, see what is happening. And, I was so much inspired by storytelling and the power that it could, do to people, not just inspire us, but also help build communities, help bring people together, help shape how people think about refugees. Living in the camp, Kenya has an incumbent policy, so refugees are not allowed to leave the camp unless you have a permit from the government. You do not have the right to work and so many things. But I never wanted to be confined to the camp, and I was asking myself, how can I, escape this confinement? And the only way was through the internet. So I started social media accounts would just share stories happening in the refugee camp. And then after I finished my primary school, I went to high school where I started a journalism club, bringing young people together to share stories happening around the camp. There were a lot of incredible stories, young people organizing in their communities, as Doris said, to set up businesses, to build youth organization, to find solutions to challenges in their communities, to mentor each other. So many incredible things happening in the camp that you will not always see on the mainstream media. You'd see, images of violence and war and people crossing borders and so many things. But there's also a lot of incredible stories of, of inspiration, people building their life, people finding hope in very, difficult circumstances. And, that is how I start my advocacy, by just, sharing the stories happening in the refugee camp, but also, through a lot of my learning and meeting other young people who also have a lot of passions and dreams. I started getting involved in community work. So when I was in high school, in my third year in high school, I started Refugee Peace Ambassadors to create a space where we would come together and just, learn from each other, share stories, find hope together, play together. And, I was just inspired by the power that community-led efforts could do. We all have no resources, we have no expertise in running project or anything, but we have the same passions, we have a lot of energy, we have a lot of, time that we want to, really come together and organize and do things. And, we just come together. And we started at a small group, mostly my classmate, just about 30 of us. But after a month, we start having more than 100 young people from across the camp coming to a Wednesday gathering that we used to have every single Wednesday, and we just talk about different stories. And then we started mentorship programming, where we would sometimes listen, to stories of people who were refugees before. Someone like Alima Aden, who was born in Kakuma refugee camp, would find TED Talk that she talked about, or other videos of her on YouTube, and just listen to them. And it was a way for young people in the camp to be a hope, knowing that they have so many challenges, but through education they could see that there was a way out. And that is the power of education, as a tool that can help refugees to be able to dream again. It helped me dream again, it helped me find hope again, it helped me find safety. And, that is how, in my advocacy, I put education at the forefront of just pushing for it, because, as you all know, in humanitarian emergency setting, education is a big issue, that is not addressed, that is not always at the forefront of humanitarian responses. But, it's a great tool for refugees, to be able not just even to achieve their hopes, but to even go back to their countries as leaders, to contribute, to building a better world. And, through all those community efforts, I saw there was a big disconnect between humanitarian organization working in Kakuma and the refugees they were working for. Sometimes I used to go for a run, and then I would go, next to the UN compound, which is a very big, huge compound. And, there are a couple of people working there. Some of them, sometimes they don't even go to the camp, and they work in those big compounds and make decisions about refugees that they don't even know. And I start trying to find a way to reach out to them. So I'd send email and say, hey, you know what, we have a meeting with young people. Do you want to come and listen? And sometimes one or two would come. And then in 2017, they had, a new head of office, Sukro Ignacio, in our work in Geneva. But Sukro, before coming to the Kakuma operation, worked in South Sudan for 3 years, and he fell in love with the community. So when he came to Kakuma, he said, "What? No, we need to transform how we work. We need to go into the community, get to know the people, work closely with them." And Sukro reached out, and we connected. And we used to come to the camp, come to game and sport activities run by young people, come to our meeting to listen to youth voices, invite us into the compound, to talk to humanitarian organizations and humanitarian leaders about, what we envision as young people living in the refugee camp. And it was just, great to see how solutions can be designed together with the communities we work for, and try to even change that, not just work for them, but work with them. And that was my vision of, pushing for representation, because solutions designed with communities are more effective than solution designed without communities. And, they're no better expert anywhere than those impacted the most by the issue. So if we are really serious about finding solution, it should never be only those who sit in big offices and who have, degrees in international development or, humanitarian responses. It should be those who have light experience in humanitarian issues. And, those were the kind of messages I was trying to push across. And, I think over the last few years, through my advocacy and engagement with different organizations, a few things I always reflect on. One thing is accountability. This is something I push a lot at conferences wherever I speak, and world leaders don't like that word very much. I remember I was speaking at a conference in March, and I was told I'm very harsh on the word accountability. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, yeah, I just had a call that I had to push. So world leaders don't like the word accountability very much, but we have to talk about accountability, because if you look at what is happening in the world today, be it the climate crisis, be it the education crisis, be it forced displacement, we know the solutions, we know what we need to do, but we have world leaders who want to go to conferences every single day, speak about their passion to end these issues, and then they go back to their peer lecturers, officers after the conference, and take the hope of it pass. We really need to be intentional about finding solution to these issues. So that is why I think accountability is really key, in finding solution to these issues. The other one is, youth representation. I think, it's very, tokenistic when you look at these spaces where young people are being engaged. And we understand youth, as a homogeneous group, which is not, young people are very diverse. They have diverse experiences. So they need to open, spaces for young people to be engaged in all the diversities, including, refugees, including the indigenous youth, including, adolescent girls who often left behind, including, young people with disability. Doris talk about that. So these need, to engage all this group of young people. And, that is one thing I call myself a community activist, because, I do not want to be an activist for refugees. I want to, mobilize refugees, and we advocate all for our right together, because I believe that community-led advocacy is more effective than just having one person trying to represent a whole big group. And I think also that is something we miss a lot, and this is also something I talk about. Sometimes I say no to conferences, because when you look at how young people are being involved today, we only have one young person or two young people. There are so many incredible voices of young people that we really need to reach out and find and bring to these spaces. It should not just be about Neil. When you talk about refugees, we need to go to Kakuma, we need to go to Dadaab refugee camp, we need to go to Malawi, we need to go to Zatar refugee camp in Jordan. We need to find young people who are doing incredible work in their communities. We cannot just have one voice all the time, representing young refugees or indigenous youth or young people from the global south. We really need to find very diverse voices of young people. And I feel humanitarian organization and government are very lazy, because they will look for voices that are already have big name on the space, but they need to go out and engage more voices. The other third thing, when I also reflect on my advocacy, is intersectionality. I believe that is a very big key to achieving equity. We cannot achieve equity if we do not address, different barriers that interlink together, to affect different groups in different ways. When you look at humanitarian setting, you'll find, different genders being affected by different issues. So they need to address all those, different barriers that different groups face. And then, I think the fourth one is questioning the system. We have systems today that are very much, rooted in colonialism, in racism, in patriarchy, and we cannot, continue, having the same system without transforming them, without decolonizing them. So these need, to make sure that we work together with this system, we disrupt them, so that we can have very effective, system that we can, use to help build a just world that work for everyone. So just a few things, that came out about consultation that we did in Kakuma refugee camp, which I believe is the only consultation for the youth declaration in a refugee camp. We're able to bring together over 80 young students in different high school in the camp, representing 9 different nationalities. Kakuma is very huge. It has a population of more than 250,000 refugees from more than 10 different nationalities. And, I think a few things, that young people in the consultation, highlighted. One was absence of refugee voices, in the global humanitarian machines, including TESS, refugee voices, are not often represented in this conversation. So these need to have more voices. And, having nearly the TESS is not representing refugees. These need to have more refugee voices. I always say inclusion should not be having one person, representing our community. Inclusion should mean leaving no one behind. So that is one thing that young people reflect on. The other thing was national consultation are not inclusive of refugees. Doris talk about how many young people in the world today in the test process are not included in national consultations with education ministry. So these need for education ministry to work together with young people to include them in national consultation, so that national commitment made by country include everyone in the country, including refugees, including indigenous youth, including adolescent girls. And then, this is something I also talk about, and this is something young people in Kakuma talk about as well at the, at the consultation, is visa restriction. At the test pre-summit, there were, I think, more than a big major of refugee delegates could not make it to the test pre-summit. A big number of refugee youth advocates that were invited to attend because of visa restriction. Myself, I have my big share of visa restriction. I'm not even sure about the test. I've had my visa denied 2 times by the US consulate here. I was to be in the US last week for the US Assembly at the UN. My visa got denied. I have my interview coming up this Thursday, the third one. I'm not sure even if I'll make it to test. So this is a big barrier that many advocates from refugee setting, from humanitarian setting, from the global south face, in being able to make sure their voices are heard in this space. So that was one thing young people in Kakuma raised as well. And I had it also when I was in Kakuma. I could not travel so many times. And then funding for education. I think this is a big thing. Today, this just about 4% of humanitarian funding that is allocated to education. So I think there is something that need to be really revamped. This more need to have more resources for education in emergency. As you saw in the report that education cannot wait, and UNICEF just released recently, about the 22 million dreams, the 222 million dreams, and those, represent young people in humanitarian setting that need urgent education support. So we cannot really support them without investing more in education mechanism, and also, youth-led initiative. Doris talked about transforming education will not happen in New York, it will happen in the field. And that is, by a solution led by young people, by solution led by communities. And those communities cannot, really lead efforts without having the access to resources that they need, be it funding, be it capacity building opportunities, be it meaningful partnership with different international organizations. So these need to really, move the needle on that, so that these communities can be able to mobilize and transform education within, it should be local to global, not global to local. And then, investing in refugee teachers. This is something young people in Kakuma talk about. Most of the teachers teaching in the camp are refugees themselves, who graduate from the high schools in the camp, who had nothing to do, and they just decide to go back to the high school and teach what they learned during the time there. There are not a lot of resources in Kakuma, even access to books. I remember when I was in Kakuma, I did not have access to a lot of books. And I used to, get, 1 or 2 books. I'm now running Kakuma Book Drive to mobilize 10,000 books to be a library in Kakuma for young people, later in the year. Legal barriers as well. This is, an issue that young people in Kakuma raise. And then, technology and how it could be used, as a bridge, to the global learning crisis. As I said earlier, I started my learning using, my father radio. And I think, my one big hope for TESS is that it will be a space, where leaders really make bold commitment to transform education, but not be afraid to be held accountable. We cannot have commitment at the Transform Education Summit, and then world leaders go back to their offices tomorrow and take the hope that they pass. We really need to be intentional. If they make commitment, young people must continue mobilizing in their communities, making noise, pushing, and demanding that they take real action so that they can achieve those commitments. And as Doris said, it will not be a one-day process. So we need to continue having more of these spaces so that we can continue, having more of this conversation. Thank you very much.
We very, very much agree with all of those points. Man, we should, Neil, you should have led the whole meeting. I think everything you said is so important. We need to make sure that youth voices are at the forefront, and really youth who reflect the diversity of experiences of youth, and really youth with lived experiences of displacement. So thank you so much for your remarks. Incredibly inspiring to see you leading, and please let us know how we can bring in more youth voices to the forefront. If you have any questions for Neil, please put them in the chat box. Unfortunately, due to time, we need to keep moving, but happy to continue the Q&A in the chat box. So I'm pleased to now introduce Rachel McKinney, who's the INEE, the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies team lead on thematic areas. And she will be providing an overview of the Creating Change Advocacy Toolkit for Education and Emergencies. Over to you, Rachel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And just to, as a precursor, my short presentation is not going to be anywhere as dynamic as Doris and Neil, but they're a hard act to follow. Thank you for lifting up so many important issues, and also putting youth at the center of this conversation. INEE, of course, we are a network of organizations across the globe, and we are primarily responsible to convene the individual organizations through a variety of networked spaces, as well as provide, create together collectively, and provide guidance on technical areas, as well as lift up the work of individual organizations and other collectives and other networks work. So the advocacy piece, the advocacy toolkit that I'll be talking about today, I just want to touch on some of the how it's organized, but also the reason that it was organized in this way. INEE believes that we, and I'm not going to read all of this, I think we can all, this is written into the advocacy toolkit, and I want to make sure that we have time to focus on some of the collective experiences and voices that we want to lift up. But we believe that we can increase reach and sustainability primarily through collective action. We believe that advocacy can ensure that decision makers are held accountable. So again, echoing what Neil was focusing on as well. We believe that advocacy can ensure that education is prioritized. We know that 20 years ago, education was fighting to have space at the table in first phase responses or initial responses of large scale. And it was primarily through the lifting up voices of children and youth that ensured education had a role at the table. We see a number of organizations and agencies and situations that created space for children's voices and youth voices who would focus on, who were able to articulate their priorities during various stages of preparedness and response to ensure that the focus of education and child protection were lifted up. And through that, of course, a reiteration that we believe that advocacy can ensure that the voices, experience, perspectives, and priorities of those affected by crises, specifically children, but also youth. When we say children, I think in INEE's language, we tend to put children and youth together, but I know that internal to INEE and of course within our network spaces, we're beginning to think through more critically how we differentiate the experiences and perspectives of children and youth. Sorry, my own child is having a bit of an issue this morning with a doll. Can you move to the next slide, please? So the way that the advocacy toolkit is organized is in thinking about considerations, so the analysis piece, in thinking about how we use information gathered through analysis and, again, collective analysis, not just of one organization or one perspective, but how we turn that into identifying and lifting up priorities, and then translating those priorities into actual planning, what impact we want to have, what change we want to make collectively. Then the conducting of advocacy activities, and then how we learn from the work that we are undertaking. So this is a quick snapshot, and I'll go into each of these 4 areas and how the toolkit is focused on each of these. Just to note, because there is such a wealth of advocacy guidance and case studies out in the world available to us, INEE is not recreating or isn't creating additional guidance. It is rather lifting up existing guidance and case studies that would allow the reader, the user, to learn from others. So this is not INEE's work, but rather INEE compiling the best of, or the most focused pieces of work of our membership, and lifting up and ensuring that we are pointing to very specific pieces within those larger works. So you can see the considerations. There's a lot of crossover, and I was really happy to hear the acknowledgement across all of the speakers, acknowledgement of the intersection of education and protection, child protection specifically. But we're looking specifically at safety and risk of our own organizations, or the members who are working in humanitarian spaces, but also the risks of children and youth as they engage in advocacy work, and ensuring that we are both holding ourselves accountable for their protection, but also creating space for them to determine, where and how children and youth want to engage in issues that we know are could be potentially sensitive. We are considering international frameworks, the existence of pre-existence of evidence and data, and then the self-care of those who are advocating. So if we're looking specifically at youth and the safety and security issues, the protection issues of youth and children on the front line of advocacy and on the front line of change making in their own context and at the global arena, we want to ensure that we are pointing our members in the right direction to think through the various considerations, and just to ensure that we are being as careful as possible, and yet creating and maintaining that space for the different perspectives and voices to come through. Next slide, please. So when planning advocacy, obviously, I think I'm speaking to the advocates here, so I don't know that we need to go into this, but again, just to say in this toolkit, it is a compilation of a variety of organizations' work, and we're pointing to things that, or instances and guidance and case studies that allow us to think carefully and creatively about different ways of making and creating change. So we know that our strength, INEE's strength, but I think our collective strength is collective action, is in joining voices, creating space for those voices to be lifted up. And I think that when I really like, Doris, when you were talking about thinking about the different spaces to make change, the focus at the national level, and then also subnational level as well. So thinking through how we lift up and create opportunities for change at community level, at school level, if we're looking in education, school level, community level, subnational, national, regional, global. Like what is it that we're wanting to change? And what are some pre-existing examples that we can look to ensure that that our members are able to affect the change that they want to make. Next slide, please. Conducting advocacy, again, you are the experts. So I think we can move on to the monitoring and evaluation. One of the pieces that I think INEE, and I know many of us struggle with, is understanding how we see change in association or associated with the activities that we undertake. And I think for us in INEE, we're extremely interested in understanding from different perspectives and different levels of work and different types of agencies and organizations and networks, what signals we're looking for, what indicators would allow us to understand the change, an impact that we're having, whether negative or positive, knowing, of course, that advocacy, we often don't see the change that we want to make or create for many, many years. So one of the things that I would like to see more of is the lifting up of case studies, the lifting up and sharing of experiences across countries through coordination efforts in the Global Education Coordination Group, for example, or the cluster and the child protection area of responsibility. I know that, at the country level, often the coordination systems are the ones who hold a lot of information. And I know many of our organizations are involved in working through those types of coordination systems, as well as global network spaces like this, like GEC. And I think for INEE, we would welcome, guidance in how to better collect and consolidate and collate this type of information to ensure that more of our members are able to benefit from the expertise of you and your colleagues. Next slide, please. So again, this is a very quick overview of this particular advocacy toolkit, but just to make note, because I feel like following, like I said, following the previous presentations, INEE has a very different role in all of this, and it is to convene members, individual members, and to, similar to GEC, mobilize and draw on the strength of our collective. And we acknowledge that over years and years of our engagement with members, global organization, smaller organizations at national levels, individuals, and also listing and scanning emerging issues, we know that the issue of youth and youth empowerment and all that entails is a priority for our membership, and we're committed to understanding what that might mean for INEE going forward. We acknowledge too that much of our work has focused primarily on younger children, but knowing, of course, that especially, I think, as someone noted, the intersection with climate change, the intersection with global politics and politicking. We have great opportunities, but also a great responsibility to ensure that we are providing the right type of guidance, that we are drawing on a wide range of perspectives, a wide range of voices. As now mentioned, it's not just the youth who are perhaps in the right place at the right time to be lifted up, but we're looking at youth across the globe. And as we at INEE are looking to re-energize and relaunch our working groups and our reference groups, we're also interested in understanding how we can reach and engage and be led more and more by youth voices and youth perspectives, both sort of at the macro level, but also in our individual working groups. So, for example, our gender working group, our ECD working group, our inclusive education working group. And I would just hope that all of you in the next couple of months, we're going to be issuing more guidance on growing our membership in these various working group spaces. And I would encourage all of you to share those broadly with the youth that you work with and the youth that you are targeting through your work, to ensure that our global guidance and our global priorities continue to be driven by and led by the voices and people that we are hoping to meet and
Thank you so
collaborate.
much, Rachel.
Yeah.
Apologies to jump in. Your
No,
point is so
please.
important. We're all singing from the same song sheet here in terms of making sure that youth voices are really at the forefront. Apologies, but for the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next speaker. We'd love to continue the Q&A and engagement on this and your interventions in the chat. I'm pleased to introduce our colleague, Tony Baker, who serves as the Senior Advisor for External Engagement at World Vision. He's got his slides up ready to share. So Tony, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Krista. Very glad to be here, and another excellent GCE-US meeting as always, and good to see all the colleagues online. I'll try to be quick. I just have a few overview slides, but I'll be talking about the UN Transforming Education Summit and a lot of the advocacy around education and emergencies that we've been doing towards that and in the recent past. And just by quick way of background, a lot of this comes from something that World Vision International popped up last year called an EIE Campaigns Champion Group. That's kind of a multi-stakeholder, NGO, CSO coalitions, foundations, UN agencies, youth-led organization group that we've been convening and collaborating with since the middle of last year. To see what we can do for EIE and to raise political will for EIE, particularly in run-up to the February conference, an EIE financing conference. And much of this work, all of this work is really supported by Education Cannot Wait and other partners supporting all of these efforts on EIE. Putting in the chat box, we have a little campaign dashboard. You can get a sense of who we are and everyone that we're working with. But by quick way of background, some of the more recent engagements, really we leaned in hard with the G7 summit this year and worked with GCE-US and GCE Global and all of the GCE coalitions of the G7 nations around a call to action and then a related advocacy brief. And then a roundtable event. I won't go into the details you see in the screen, but really pleased. The call to action endorsed by 66 organizations and coalitions. A lot of those coalitions are also including other people within them, other organizations that don't directly endorse. And keep in mind that this is just for the 7 countries of the G7 that we were quite focused on there. And then a related longer kind of policy advocacy brief on that in partnership with many that we're working with, and then a roundtable event. And as you can perhaps see from some of the materials, this started to pivot and transition. It's G7, but then at that same time in May and June, you have the Transforming Education Summit begin, the TESS pre-summit that happened in Paris at the end of June. And despite us often thinking about this summit and that conference, et cetera, we have to connect the dots. These are all the same issues across these summits. So really it's applicable to everything. And a lot of the momentum that we're seeing and the issues that are coming out are now directly applicable to the Transforming Education Summit. One thing that the Champions Group was doing in parallel to this was getting ready for the TESS Summit itself in September in New York. And we were conducting consultations across the membership of EIE champions, and particularly youth-led organizations. And we've been on quite a fantastic learning journey with everyone involved. We're getting and reaching all of these different parts of our landscape, and we're seeing and knowing how to do that carefully. You know, I think initial thoughts are a youth-led call to action, but youth, they want you know, an intergenerational approach. There's no real need to kind of fragment our own kind of solidarity in the different demographics that we have, but really how do we collaborate together and come together as even voices at the table? And I mean, I'm very pleased to have been working with everyone and kind of helping to unify some of that in our work. So we were in parallel conducting some consultations. And I'll put in the chat here an excellent piece by 100 million. We're really working with youth-led organizations and connecting to the global infrastructure of the Students' Union. 100 million is an advocacy organization that really backstops and helps the advocacy of the Global Students Forum. And within Global Students Forum, there's the regional Students Union, the All Africa Students Union. We've been also working closely with. And so really kind of linking to that youth-led infrastructure out there, in addition to a lot of the youth-led initiatives that we know and support and are involved in as well. But out of that, what is now coming, we are developing a call to action, an NGO. This is a CSO, a non-state actor kind of call to action. This is not for government endorsement. I'm sorry for all the language on the screen. These are the kind of the main recommendations. I'm not taking us through all of them. I just want to offer this snapshot and just, and you can probably hear my voice, my own excitement, because this is the intersection I think our community has been lacking. How we work together, not just NGOs doing their thing and youth groups doing their thing, but how we intersect. And you can see on the screen, and even our consultations, we know from youth-led organizations and others on the ground what those realities are. Now the task and the benefit of uniting with different parts of our landscape is, how do we take those realities and intersect them into governmental approaches, institutional agencies, into World Bank and UNESCO and GPE and ECW, and how that whole architecture works. And that's what we're working on right now. I feel like we're always kind of doing something new in this space, but we're developing this call to action. The three main areas are a lot of what we're hearing on this call in our meeting today. It's this nexus planning, some technocratic language there, but basically that fragmentation between the world of humanitarian response and planning, of emergencies happen and now let's respond, to the development response and planning of what we are doing on a regular basis and what governments and supporters are doing. Well, that's a two-way road that isn't always meeting. And so we really need those education plans in regular stability and development context to be crisis resilient and to be ready for crisis. And then those humanitarian response plans to not leave out education and to include education. So it's really that kind of nexus and two-way street. Number two is what we are hearing from other speakers on the call. We know the issues in front of us are not just education issues, what children and youth and refugees and others are experiencing on the ground. They are whole child problems that are going to require whole child solutions. It's mental health, psychosocial support, gender-based violence, health and nutrition. So how do we start to break down those sector silos that we see at both the national and global levels, so that the architecture can actually start to work and provide real solutions to that? And then number three is the finance aspect of that, and really saying that, look, out of the Transforming Education Summit, we need to see money behind that. We can't just leave September with another set of commitments and no action. And really leading the next moment in February, there's a financing conference that will be happening in Switzerland in February, specific for education and emergencies. And it's really the first opportunity for everyone committed to the test space to put money where their mouth is in February. I just want to share quickly the event side, and let me turn it back over to Krista. I know we're out of time, but we have a lineup of things going on, everyone, and we're just collaborating with GCE-US, 100 million, UNESCO, others in a lot of different ways. One big one, we know we have to influence things before tests. We can't wait until the day of the summit to get loud. So we're working with an event in Uganda, in Rhino refugee camp, with a number of partners to launch this 3 transformations call to action and what we want to see out of TESS. And then we're taking it to a number of events and things within the TESS summit itself. And I'll also note, now we are working with UNESCO, and they're saying, well, they're going to now develop an EIE call to action for government endorsement. And this is perfect. We're mobilizing on the non-governmental side, our youth partners and NGOs and CSOs and coalitions about what we want to see. And now, the member states are going to be asked to commit to something that UNESCO and others are developing. And so we're aligning and linking, and a very nice kind of complementarity, and exactly what we should see. And this is, getting out early and in advance is that means of influence, and working closely with youth-led organizations is how we're getting their voices out in front of these opportunities and making sure that their voices are what's setting the commitments and things that governments will be making in TESS in September. So short time, I'll leave it at that. Back over to Krista to wrap us up, and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Tony. Really appreciate your input here. Just a few quick announcements and reminders. We put it in the chat as well. But thank you to those of you who've already let us know your organization or you specifically plan to attend the Transforming Education Summit. We'd love to stay abreast of your plans as they're being developed and collaborate. So please email our colleague Stephanie Peña, who's leading these efforts in New York. Her email address is in the chat. We also wanted to highlight, as was put in the chat earlier, the fiscal year 2024 letter to OMB. This is a US government specific opportunity that we welcome sign on from many organizations. So that's an opportunity for you as well. And we wanted to already get on your calendars that our next coalition meeting will be on September 12th with the focus on International Literacy Day and foundational literacy and numeracy. So excited to hear from our colleagues at USAID, Rebecca Ramirez, and others for that. And then Stephanie is leading our Inclusive Education and Early Childhood Community of Practice, which will take place on October 6th. So the link to register for that is there as well. But thank you all for your wonderful engagement today. We really appreciate all that you're doing to put youth voices at the forefront and prioritize education for people and youth in vulnerable contexts, including refugees. So thank you so much. Appreciate your advocacy.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for staying with us for one extra minute. Considering everything that's underway, Krista, Annie, Stephanie, to all of our, so grateful. Please continue to contact us and reach out with your ideas. We're looking forward to this drumbeat now through TESS and beyond. And please do join us at the next community and coalition meetings. Thank you all. Look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you.